The most disturbing truth about your existence is not that you will die, but that you will die fundamentally misunderstood. You will never be completely understood. Not by your partner, not by your parents, not by your best friend. The person who has known you for decades, who has seen you at your best and at your worst, who claims to know you better than anyone else, that person still experiences only a version of you that exists solely in their mind. This is not a pessimistic or cynical view. It is simply the fundamental reality of human consciousness. Your experience of existence is radically private. The way you perceive colors, the exact quality of your emotions, the precise nature of your thoughts, these experiences are locked within the confines of your mind. You can describe them, you can try to externalize them through art or conversation, but they remain fundamentally untransferable. And that means that, at your deepest core, you are fundamentally alone. Your consciousness is an island that no bridge can completely connect to any other. But what if I told you that this abyss of loneliness we fear so much can be transformed into the greatest source of strength we will ever know? The philosophers who have confronted this reality did not end up in despair, but in a deeper understanding of what it means to be human and how to find meaning within this inescapable loneliness. We are about to explore how to transform this uncomfortable truth that at your core you are fundamentally alone into an unshakable fortress. But be warned, this is not a motivational video. It is a confrontation with one of the darkest and deepest aspects of human existence. Understanding this may be the most liberating thing you ever do. Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, understood this isolation better than most. He called life a tragic illusion, precisely because we are fundamentally alone in our suffering, while believing that we can be completely known and understood by others. Schopenhauer observed that each person is trapped inside their own consciousness. Their entire experience of reality, sight, sound, emotion, and though talkers within the theater of their mind. No matter how eloquently you describe your inner experience, you can never transfer the raw sensation of it to another person. Consider a simple example, the color blue. You and I can agree that the sky is blue, but I have no way of knowing whether your subjective experience of blue matches mine. Perhaps what I call blue would look like what you call green if I could somehow see through your eyes. We use the same words, but our internal experiences remain private and potentially very different. This becomes even more evident when dealing with emotions or complex ideas. Think of a time when you tried to explain something deeply important to you, a belief, a feeling, an intuition, and saw blank incomprehension on someone else's face. You used all the right words, constructed perfect analogies, but still, they didn't really get it. This is not a failure of your communication skills. It is an encounter with the limits of shared understanding. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can only be himself when he is alone. If he does not love solitude, he will not love liberty, for it is only when he is alone that he is truly free." This wasn't just a philosophical stance. It was a recognition that our attempts to escape our fundamental isolation often lead to greater suffering. We see this in everyday life. People misinterpret your intentions, no matter how clearly you express them. They project their own fears and desires onto your words and actions. They respond not to you, but to the version of you that exists in their minds. This isn't because they are deliberately misinterpreting you. It's because direct access to another consciousness is impossible. Schopenhauer's insight was not that we should despair over this isolation, but that we should recognize it as the starting point for an authentic life. Only by acknowledging the fundamentally private nature of experience can we begin to build meaningful bridges between our isolated consciousnesses. But most of us flee from this truth. We prefer the illusion that we are fully understood, that our inner experiences are perfectly communicable, that our isolation is just a matter of not finding the right words. We create shortcuts and approximations. We accept the simplified version of ourselves that exists in the minds of others, because the alternative, recognizing our fundamental isolation, seems unbearably lonely, and so we live divided. Part of us knows that we are not truly understood, while the other part clings to the comforting illusion of perfect connection. This internal conflict weakens us, making us dependent on external validation, on superficial confirmations that we are seen, that we are known, even when, deep down, we know that we are not. The truth is that this inner void cannot be filled by other people. No amount of love, friendship, or understanding can completely eliminate the fundamental isolation of consciousness. This is the dark truth that most of us spend our entire lives trying to avoid. But what if, instead of running away from this abyss, you turned toward it? What if, instead of fearing the fundamental loneliness of consciousness, you embraced it as the foundation of your inner strength? Wake up, work, pay bills, sleep, and repeat it all over again the next day. Life goes by like this, and one day you realize that time has slipped away. Dreams were postponed. Opportunities went unnoticed. This happens because no one ever taught you how to see the game of life the right way. But there is another path. If you want to reach the next level, you need to access new knowledge. And that's exactly what you'll find in the White Rabbit Codes. This book will open your eyes to what is really happening. You'll understand why you keep getting stuck in the same cycles, learn how to escape autopilot, and start seeing the opportunities that were always there. And finally, you'll make decisions that truly lead to the life you've always wanted. If you feel ready for this change, the link is in the pinned comment. You'll be surprised at how simple it can be to increase your prosperity. Success is a decision. The choice is yours. Friedrich Nietzsche deepened this understanding of fundamental isolation, recognizing that this loneliness terrifies most people, causing them to flee to the false comfort of the crowd. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche wrote, "No shepherd and only one flock. All want the same, all are the same. Whoever feels differently goes willingly to the madhouse." This was not just a social commentary. It was an observation about how humans respond to the terror of existential isolation. Rather than confront the abyss of their own consciousness, most people seek to lose themselves in group identity. They adopt ready-made values, beliefs, and lifestyles. They find comfort in conformity because it creates the illusion that they are not alone, that their inner experience is shared by others in exactly the same way. The fear of isolation is so powerful that people will abandon their own perceptions and insights rather than separate themselves from the group. They will deny their own experience of reality in order to maintain the comforting fiction of perfect understanding and belonging. This is what Nietzsche called the spirit of gravity, the force that pulls us down into conventional thinking instead of allowing us to fly with our own unique perspective. Notice how this manifests in modern society. People are rarely truly alone with their thoughts. At the slightest hint of loneliness, they reach for their smartphones, open their social media feeds, turn on the television, anything to avoid confronting the emptiness of their own being. Social media amplifies this dynamic by offering countless superficial connections that masquerade as meaningful relationships. We like, comment, share all, to maintain the illusion that we are known and understood. But these interactions rarely touch the depths of our experience. It is easier to post an edited version of yourself, one that is acceptable and understandable to others, than to face the truth that much of who you are will forever remain inaccessible to anyone else. Most human relationships are built not on deep understanding, but on convenience, compatibility, and mutual benefit. This isn't cynicism, it's realism. The people in your life respond primarily to the aspects of you that are relevant to their needs and experiences. Your coworker relates to your professional skills, but may have no concept of your spiritual life. Your drinking buddy connects with your social self but may never glimpse your intellectual depth. Even in intimate relationships, this pattern remains. Partners develop shortcuts and approximations to understand each other. They learn which external signals correspond to which internal states. When she tilts her head that way, she's skeptical. When his voice takes that tone, he's hiding something. These are useful tools for navigating the relationship, but they are not the same as direct access to the other person's consciousness. This explains why people who have been married for decades can still surprise or deeply disappoint each other. It explains why you can suddenly feel completely alone in a room full of friends. The most common response to this sense of isolation is to intensify our efforts to connect. We share more, talk more, seek more validational in the hope of filling the chasm. But these attempts are doomed to failure because they are based on a false premise that the chasm can be filled. Nietzsche saw an alternative. Instead of being devoured by the abyss of loneliness, we can embrace it. The person who accepts their fundamental isolation gains something precious: intellectual independence. When you no longer need others to validate your perspective, you become free to see reality as it appears to you, not as others insist it must be. That is why Nietzsche praised the free spirit, the person who can be alone with their perceptions and insights, who does not need the constant reinforcement of group agreement. This stance is not comfortable. It often leads to literal loneliness, as others shy away from someone who will not conform to expected patterns of thought. But it leads to authentic understanding. The truly powerful individual, in Nietzsche's view, is not the one who conquers others or accumulates social status. It is the one who conquers the fear of isolation and becomes self-sufficient in their thinking. And this is where we begin to see the abyss transform into a fortress. The person who accepts their fundamental isolation is no longer at the mercy of the need to belong, the need to be understood. That person has found a solid foundation within themselves, a foundation that does not depend on external validation or the understanding of others. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, understood that most people fear loneliness because it forces a confrontation with the self, including all aspects of the self that we prefer to ignore. Jung observed that modern life offers endless ways to avoid being truly alone with our thoughts. Even before the age of smartphones and social media, humans excelled at creating distractions to avoid self-awareness. The fear that drives this avoidance is not just a fear of loneliness, it is a fear of what we might discover about ourselves in genuine solitude. That is why Jung wrote, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself, or from holding certain views that others consider unacceptable." The most painful aspect of isolation is not the physical separation from others, it is the recognition that your inner world remains fundamentally private. When we are truly alone, we are forced to confront parts of ourselves that we normally keep hidden, our shadow, as Jung called it. The shadow contains everything we repress, deny, or reject, not just our negative impulses such as anger or envy, but also unrealized potential, unrecognized talents, aspects of ourselves that don't fit into the identity we've constructed. When we avoid solitude, we avoid this essential confrontation. We prefer constant distraction, incessant noise, continuous social validation. We prefer to exist on the surface of our being rather than dive into its depths, because the depths contain not only treasures but also monsters. Jung believed that facing this loneliness was necessary for what he called individuation, the process of becoming a complete and integrated person. When we avoid loneliness, we avoid confronting the dark aspects of ourselves, the parts we reject, suppress, or deny. Without this confrontation, we remain fragmented, projecting our rejected qualities onto others instead of integrating them into a complete self. Consider how many of history's greatest insights occurred during periods of isolation. Nietzsche wrote his most profound works while living alone in the Swiss Alps. Einstein developed the theory of relativity during solitary walks. Martin Luther King Jr. formulated his most powerful ideas in the solitude of a Birmingham jail cell. These were not coincidences. They reflected the clarifying power of facing one's thoughts without the distorting influence of constant social interaction. In solitude, these individuals were forced to confront their own minds, including the dark parts of themselves that would normally remain hidden. Einstein himself spoke about how his solitary walks allowed unconventional thoughts to emerge, thoughts that might be suppressed in social settings. King described how the enforced solitude of prison allowed him to think long and hard about issues that the constant turmoil of the civil rights movement made difficult to confront. This pattern repeats itself throughout human history. Artists retreat to isolated cabins to create their masterpieces. Mystics seek the solitude of the desert or the mountains. Scientists isolate themselves in laboratories, not because they are misanthropes, but because they instinctively recognize that certain forms of understanding are only accessible when we step away from the constant loop of social feedback and directly confront the contents of our own consciousness. Jung did not recommend permanent isolation. He understood humans as fundamentally social beings, but he insisted that periodic, meaningful solitude was essential for genuine self-knowledge and, paradoxically, for genuine connection with others. Only the person who knows themselves can offer authentic presence to another person, rather than projecting fantasies and unmet needs onto them. Much of human suffering comes not from loneliness itself, but from our resistance to it. We struggle against the fundamental isolation of consciousness, desperately seeking connection, validation, understanding. We expend extraordinary energy trying to communicate our inner world, only to discover again and again that no one can truly inhabit it but ourselves. But what if, instead of fighting this reality, we embraced it? What if, instead of fearing the loneliness of consciousness, we saw it as a resourcia, sacred space, where we can find and integrate all parts of ourselves, including those the world has taught us to fear or reject? This is the necessary confrontation, not just with the fact of our isolation, but with everything that isolation contains. It is the confrontation with our shadow, our contradictions, our inconvenient truths. It is a confrontation that most people will avoid at all costs, filling every moment with noise-literal noise from television or music, social noise from constant interaction, or the noise of busyness that keeps reflection at bay. Is this content making you reflect and sparking new ways of thinking? If so, click the Super Thanks button just below the video. It's a way to say thank you and help me bring more content like this to those who need to reflect on life. The path to turning the abyss into a fortress begins with a paradoxical step, completely accepting the fundamental loneliness of consciousness. The person who cannot bear to be alone will never bring their authentic self into relationships. Instead, they will bring their needs, their fears, their desperate desire to escape isolation. They will use others as distractions from self-awareness, rather than engaging in genuine exchange. The strongest people are not those who never experience loneliness. They are those who have mastered their relationship with loneliness. They have faced the abyss of their own consciousness and found it not only terrifying, but also rich with possibilities. This mastery does not happen by accident. Most people actively avoid confronting their fundamental isolation. They fill every moment with noise-literal noise from television or music, social noise from constant interaction, or the noise of busyness that keeps reflection at bay. The alternative requires courage. It means deliberately stepping away from distractions and allowing yourself to feel the full weight of your isolated consciousness. It means sitting with the uncomfortable recognition that aspects of your experience will never be fully communicated or understood by another person. It means developing a relationship with yourself that does not depend on external validation. This path leads to genuine strength, not the fragile strength of someone who needs constant reinforcement, but the resilient strength of someone who can be alone when necessary. The person who has mastered solitude does not fear being misunderstood or rejected, because they no longer need perfect understanding or universal acceptance. Paradoxically, this self-sufficiency creates the possibility for more authentic connection with others. When you no longer need others to complete you or validate your reality, you can engage with them from a place of integrity rather than need. You can listen to their perspective without feeling threatened by their difference from your own. You can offer your truth without demanding agreement. This is the alchemical transformation. Loneliness, from a condition to be feared and avoided, becomes the source of your deepest strength. The isolation of consciousness, from a prison, becomes a fortress, a safe place from which you can venture out, knowing that you always have a refuge within yourself. Cultivating this fortress requires deliberate practice. Start by setting aside time for genuine solitude, not just being physically alone, but being truly present with your own thoughts, without distractions. Turn off your phone, turn off the television, sit with your own consciousness. At first, this can be deeply uncomfortable. You may encounter thoughts you would rather ignore, emotions you would rather not feel, truths about yourself you would rather not confront. This is the encounter with the shadow that Jung spoke of, the necessary confrontation with the rejected parts of yourself. But as you persist, something remarkable begins to happen. Solitude becomes less terrifying. The awareness of your fundamental isolation becomes not a source of despair, but a source of clarity. You begin to see how much of your suffering comes not from loneliness itself, but from your resistance to it. And then, gradually, you begin to build your inner fortress. It is not a quick or easy process. It is the work of a lifetime. But each time you face the abyss of your own consciousness and survive, the fortress grows a little stronger. This is the truth that the philosophers we study understood. Schopenhauer did not remain in lonely despair. He found freedom in the acceptance of isolation. Nietzsche did not succumb to nihilism. He forged a philosophy that celebrated the self-sufficiency of the spirit. Jung did not lose himself in the shadows of the unconscious. He found a path to integration and wholeness. You came into this world alone, and you will leave it alone. Between those moments, you will experience countless connections with others, some fleeting, some lasting, some superficial, some deep. But throughout it all, your consciousness remains your own, an island in the archipelago of humanity. The ultimate question is not whether you will experience loneliness. You will. It is whether that loneliness will be a destructive force that drives you to false connections and self-abandonment, or whether it will be the forge that shapes you into someone who can stand firmly in your own perception of reality while still authentically reaching out to others. The grim truth about human existence is not that we are alone. It is that we refuse to acknowledge our loneliness and thus never develop the strength that comes from facing it. You cannot escape the fundamental isolation of consciousness, but you can transform it from a prison into a fortress. This inner fortress becomes the base from which you can venture out into the world, form relationships, seek connection, not out of desperate need, but from a position of inner strength. You offer others not a broken fragment of yourself that begs to be completed, but a whole and integrated being that can share authentically. The connections formed from this fortress are paradoxically deeper than those born of need. They are based not on escape from loneliness, but on mutual acceptance of it. Two people, each recognizing the fundamental isolation of the other, can find a form of intimacy that transcends perfect understanding. It is like two islands that, though separated by the sea, still find ways to send signals to each other, knowing they can never completely share the same land, but finding beauty and meaning in communicating across the distance. This is the ultimate alchemy of isolation, its transformation not only into personal strength, but into a new form of connection. A connection that does not deny the fundamental loneliness of consciousness, but honors it. That does not demand perfect understanding, but offers perfect presence. That does not seek to escape the abyss, but builds bridges across it. The choice, as always, is yours. Will you continue to distract yourself from the fundamental privacy of consciousness? Will you continue to settle for superficial connections that never truly touch the core of who you are? Or will you have the courage to face the abyss of solitude and discover that within it lies not only darkness, but also the possibility of genuine strength? If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You're subscribed to the channel, you watch the videos, you reflect on every idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to take this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the White Rabbit Codes is ready for you. The link is in the pinned comment. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.